They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I served mine ice cold, with a side of career advancement and a garnish of pure, calculated satisfaction. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, from the moment my world shattered with just 6 words that would fuel my transformation from victim to victor. You're too ugly to love. Those words still echo in my mind, but now they taste different. Now they taste like victory. But back then, 3 years ago, they tasted like poison that burned through my chest and settled in my stomach like lead. The worst part? He was laughing when he said it. Actually laughing like it was the funniest joke he'd ever told. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to my inevitable heartbreak. But love makes you blind, doesn't it? It makes you ignore the way someone's eyes glaze over when you're talking, the way they check their phone constantly when you're together, the way they never quite look at you the same way they look at other people. My name is Sarah, and I was 25 when my life imploded. I thought I was in love with Marcus Chen, a guy I'd met at a marketing conference in Chicago. He was everything I thought I wanted. Tall, charming, successful, with this easy confidence that drew people to him like moths to a flame. I was one of those moths, completely mesmerized and completely unaware I was about to get burned. We'd been dating for 8 months. 8 months of what I thought was building towards something real, something permanent. I'd already started imagining our future together, had even looked at engagement rings online during my lunch breaks. God, I was such a fool. But that's what love does to you. It makes you vulnerable, opens you up to believe in possibilities that exist only in your imagination. The night everything changed started innocently enough. I was supposed to meet Marcus at his apartment for dinner. We'd planned it earlier in the week. I was going to cook my grandmother's pasta recipe, the one that always impressed people. I'd stopped by the grocery store after work, carefully selecting the best ingredients, my heart light with anticipation. I even bought a bottle of wine, something nice to celebrate. Well, nothing in particular. Just being together. I used the spare key he'd given me, another sign I'd misinterpreted as commitment, and let myself into his apartment. The smell of takeout containers and stale beer hit me immediately, which was odd because Marcus was usually meticulous about cleanliness. But what stopped me cold wasn't the mess. It was the sound of voices coming from his bedroom. Marcus's voice and another voice, a woman's voice, laughing. My hands went numb, and the grocery bag slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud that seemed to echo through the apartment. My heart started hammering against my ribs so hard I could hear it in my ears. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was his sister, or a coworker, or anyone else with a perfectly innocent explanation for being in his bedroom at 7:30 on a Wednesday night. But I knew. Deep down, in that place where intuition lives, I already knew. I should have left. Should have turned around, walked out, and saved myself from what came next. But I couldn't move. It was like my feet had grown roots through the hardwood floor. So I stood there, frozen, listening to their muffled conversation through the bedroom door. "She's coming over tonight," Marcus was saying, and my stomach dropped. He was talking about me. I should probably get rid of her soon. "This whole thing has gone on way too long. Why don't you just break up with her?" The woman's voice was musical, light, everything mine wasn't. Seems cruel to keep stringing her along. Marcus laughed, and the sound cut through me like a knife. "Have you seen her? I mean, really looked at her? She's so desperate for attention she'll believe anything I tell her. It's almost sad, really." "Marcus, that's horrible." But the woman was still laughing too, so her moral objection didn't carry much weight. I know. But honestly, she's convenient. Always available, never questions anything, does whatever I want. And she tries so hard to be pretty for me, it's almost entertaining. All that makeup, those outfits she thinks are stylish. He paused, and I could picture him shaking his head. Poor girl doesn't realize that some people just aren't meant to be beautiful. My vision started to blur. The walls of the apartment seemed to be closing in around me, and I had to grab the kitchen counter to keep from falling. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. The man I loved, the man I'd been planning a future with, was talking about me like I was some pathetic charity case he'd taken pity on. "So what's the plan?" the woman asked. "You can't keep this up forever. I'll figure something out. Maybe I'll tell her I'm not ready for commitment, or that I need space to focus on my career. She'll probably cry and beg me to reconsider, but she'll accept it eventually. Girls like Sarah always do." Girls like Sarah? You know, desperate ones. The kind who are so grateful for any attention that they'll put up with anything. She's not exactly beating guys off with a stick, if you know what I mean. The woman's laughter got louder. Oh my God, Marcus, you're terrible. What made you start dating her in the first place? Honestly, I was coming off that bad breakup with Jessica, and Sarah was there at the conference looking at me like I was some kind of god. It was an ego boost when I needed it. Plus, she works for that tech startup that was getting buzz. I thought the connection might be useful for networking. The words hit me like physical blows. Each revelation was worse than the last. Our entire relationship had been built on lies, manipulation, and his convenience. Every kiss, every intimate moment, every time he'd told me I was beautiful, it had all been fake. Performance art designed to keep me around for whatever purpose I served in his life. But now you're over the breakup and ready to move on to someone more appropriate? The woman prompted. Exactly. Someone who actually turns heads when she walks into a room. Someone I can be proud to be seen with at company events and social gatherings. Sarah's sweet, but let's be honest, she's not exactly arm candy material. So when are you going to end it? Soon. I'm just trying to figure out the gentlest way to do it. Despite everything, I don't want to completely destroy her. The truth would probably crush her. What truth? Marcus sighed dramatically. That she's too ugly to love. I mean, really love? The kind of love that makes you want to build a life with someone. I could never introduce her to my family, never bring her to work functions, never, I don't know, be seen with her anywhere that matters. She's just not the kind of woman you marry. The silence that followed was deafening. Then they both burst into laughter, as if he'd just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. My humiliation was their entertainment. I don't remember making the decision to leave. One moment I was standing in his kitchen, destroyed and motionless, and the next I was stumbling down the hallway toward the elevator, my face wet with tears I didn't remember starting to cry. The grocery bags lay forgotten on his floor, along with every dream I'd built around our relationship. The elevator ride down felt eternal. My reflection in the metal doors showed me everything Marcus had seen. Plain brown hair that never held a style, pale skin that flushed red when I was emotional, eyes that were too small and a nose that was too big. I saw what he saw, someone forgettable, someone unworthy of real love, someone so desperate for affection that she'd accept scraps and call them a feast. By the time I reached my car, the tears had stopped, but something else had started. Something cold and sharp was growing in my chest, pushing out the pain and replacing it with something harder. I sat in my driver's seat, staring at the steering wheel, and felt my heartbreak crystallizing into something else entirely. Rage. Not the hot, explosive kind that makes you scream and throw things. This was different. This was ice-cold fury that settled into my bones and started planning. As I drove home through the city streets, past couples holding hands and friends laughing over dinner, one thought kept circling through my mind. He was going to pay for this. Not just for the betrayal, though that was bad enough. He was going to pay for making me feel small, for making me question my worth, for turning my love into a joke he shared with other people. He was going to pay for every moment I'd spent trying to be good enough for him, every outfit I'd carefully chosen hoping to earn his approval, every time I'd second-guessed myself because I could sense his subtle disapproval. But most of all, he was going to pay for making me believe I was too ugly to love. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror for a long time, really looking at myself for the first time in months, not trying to see what Marcus saw, not cataloging my flaws, just looking. I wasn't conventionally beautiful, that was true. But I wasn't ugly either. I was average, normal human. The kind of person who could be attractive with confidence, who could be beautiful with the right mindset. The person staring back at me from the mirror had been dimmed by months of subtle emotional abuse. My posture was hunched, my expression uncertain, my whole demeanor screaming insecurity. But underneath that broken exterior was someone else, someone stronger, someone who wouldn't accept being treated like a consolation prize ever again. I made myself a promise that night, standing in front of that mirror with mascara streaks on my cheeks and determination building in my chest. I was going to become the kind of person Marcus Chen could never dismiss. I was going to become someone he would regret underestimating. And then I was going to destroy him. The next few days passed in a blur of mechanical routine. I went to work, performed my duties at the marketing firm where I was a junior account executive, came home, and spent my evenings researching. Not obsessively, not frantically, but with the methodical precision of someone conducting a business analysis. I researched Marcus's company, Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, where he worked as a senior account manager. I studied their client base, their recent campaigns, their corporate structure. I researched their competitors, their industry trends, their growth projections. I looked up their job postings, their company culture, their leadership team. Most importantly, I researched their parent company, Titanium Global, a massive marketing conglomerate that owned dozens of agencies across the country. Marcus never called to ask why I'd stood him up for dinner, never texted to check if I was okay, never reached out at all. His silence told me everything I needed to know about how little I'd meant to him, even as a convenient distraction. 2 weeks after that horrible night, I ran into him at a coffee shop near downtown. I was in line, minding my own business, when I heard his voice behind me. My whole body tensed, but I forced myself to remain calm, to breathe normally, to keep my expression neutral. "Sarah? Hey, stranger." His voice was casual, friendly, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't been planning to dump me while calling me too ugly to love. I turned around slowly, and there he was. Tall, handsome Marcus with his perfect smile and his expensive shirt, looking at me like I was a pleasant surprise instead of someone whose heart he'd unknowingly shattered. "Hi, Marcus." My voice came out steadier than I'd expected. "I haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" The concern in his voice seemed genuine, and for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I'd misunderstood what I'd heard. Maybe... I knew what I'd heard. I knew what he'd said about me, what he really thought of me. The casual cruelty of it, the laughter, the complete disregard for my feelings, none of that was a misunderstanding. "I've been busy with work," I said simply. "Oh, cool. How's the job going? Still at that little startup?" Little startup. The dismissiveness in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. Everything about his demeanor screamed that he saw me as beneath him, not worth his serious attention. "It's going well. Actually, I've been thinking about making some changes soon." "Changes?" He seemed mildly interested, the way you might be interested in a stranger's small talk. "Career moves, new opportunities, you know how it is." Marcus nodded absently, already looking past me toward the coffee menu. "That's great. Listen, I've been meaning to call you. We should talk soon, you know. About things. About breaking up with me gently, I thought. About letting me down easy so you can move on to someone more appropriate, without feeling guilty." "Sure," I said. "Let's definitely talk soon." "Great. I'll call you this week." But he was already turning away, his attention shifting to the barista, dismissing me without a second thought. I watched him order his complicated coffee drink, watched him check his phone while he waited, watched him leave without looking back at me once, and I felt that cold determination in my chest grow stronger. That night, I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to quit my job at the startup and find a way to work for Titanium Global. Not at some subsidiary office, not in some entry-level position, but at the top. I was going to climb the corporate ladder faster than anyone thought possible, and I was going to land directly above Marcus Chen. It sounded impossible. I was a junior account executive with limited experience, trying to break into one of the most competitive marketing conglomerates in the country. But I had something most people didn't have: pure, focused motivation. I had a goal that burned brighter than ambition, stronger than greed, more persistent than simple career advancement. I had revenge. The first step was education. I enrolled in an accelerated MBA program, taking evening and weekend classes while working full-time. It was exhausting, but every time I felt like giving up, I thought about Marcus's laughter, about being called too ugly to love, about the casual way he'd dismissed me to another woman. I studied marketing theory, business strategy, financial analysis, organizational psychology. I absorbed everything I could about corporate leadership, team management, and strategic planning. I learned about hostile takeovers, market positioning, and competitive analysis. I studied the careers of successful executives, reading their books, watching their interviews, learning their strategies. But more than that, I studied myself. I hired a personal trainer and committed to a fitness routine that transformed my body from soft and uncertain to strong and confident. I worked with a stylist to develop a professional wardrobe that projected authority and success. I practiced speaking in public, took acting classes to improve my presence, learned to project confidence even when I didn't feel it. I wasn't trying to become beautiful by Marcus's standards. I was trying to become formidable by anyone's standards. 6 months into my transformation, I got my first break. One of my professors at business school mentioned a consulting position with a small firm that worked exclusively with Titanium Global subsidiaries. It was contract work, analyzing marketing strategies for their smaller accounts, but it would get my foot in the door and my name on their radar. I applied immediately, crafting a cover letter that positioned my startup experience as an asset rather than a limitation. I highlighted my fresh perspective, my willingness to work hard, my ability to see opportunities that more established professionals might miss. I was honest about my ambitions. I wanted to grow, to learn, to eventually work directly for Titanium Global's executive team. They hired me within a week. The consulting work was intense, but exactly what I needed. I was analyzing marketing campaigns for Titanium Global's smaller clients, identifying inefficiencies, proposing strategic improvements. My recommendations were well received, my analyses were thorough, and my work ethic was undeniable. I was putting in 12-hour days, working weekends, treating every project like my career depended on it. Because it did. During this time, I maintained minimal contact with Marcus. He'd called me twice in the past 6 months, both times with that same casual tone, asking if I wanted to catch up over coffee. I'd politely declined both times, claiming work commitments. He didn't seem particularly disappointed by my unavailability, which only strengthened my resolve. I knew he was still at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, still working as a senior account manager, still living the same life he'd been living when he'd crushed me. According to his LinkedIn profile, which I checked periodically for research purposes, he was working on some mid-level campaigns for regional clients. Solid work, but nothing spectacular. Nothing that would prepare him for what was coming. A year into my consulting contract, I got the call I'd been working toward. David Morrison, Titanium Global's Vice President of Strategic Development, wanted to meet with me about a potential full-time position. Not just any position, a senior analyst role that would put me on the fast track to management. The interview was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at Titanium Global's headquarters, a gleaming 40-story tower in downtown that housed some of the most powerful people in the marketing industry. I spent days preparing, researching every executive I might meet, analyzing recent company developments, crafting responses to every possible question. But when I walked into that building, dressed in a sharp navy suit that cost more than I used to spend on clothes in 6 months, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. I was exactly where I needed to be. David Morrison was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who spoke quickly and expected you to keep up. He grilled me for 2 hours about my strategic thinking, my analytical skills, my vision for the future of marketing. We discussed industry trends, digital transformation, the evolution of consumer behavior. He threw hypothetical scenarios at me and watched how I worked through complex problems in real time. "Your consulting work has been impressive," he said finally. "Thorough, innovative, results-oriented. But this role would be different. You'd be working directly with our subsidiary management teams, helping them optimize their operations and maximize their potential. It requires someone who can see the big picture while managing complex details." "That's exactly the kind of challenge I'm looking for," I replied. "I want to understand how successful marketing organizations function at every level, from individual campaigns to corporate strategy. And where do you see yourself in 5 years?" This was the question I'd been preparing for since the day I heard Marcus laughing about how ugly I was. "I want to be running strategy for one of your major subsidiaries. I want to be the person who turns underperforming divisions into market leaders." David smiled. "That's ambitious. I don't believe in small goals." He offered me the position that afternoon. Senior Strategic Analyst, reporting directly to the VP level, with a salary that doubled what I'd been making at the startup. More importantly, it came with access to information about all of Titanium Global's subsidiary companies, including Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, including Marcus Chen's performance reviews, client assignments, and career trajectory. I started the new job 3 weeks later, and within my first month, I had a complete picture of Pinnacle's operations. They were a mid-tier agency with solid but unspectacular performance. Their client retention was good but not great, their profit margins were industry standard, and their growth trajectory was steady but uninspiring. Marcus was exactly where I'd expected him to be, a competent but unremarkable senior account manager handling regional clients. His performance reviews were consistently positive, but contained no signs of exceptional talent or leadership potential. He was professional, reliable, and forgettable. Perfect. It took me 18 months to work my way into a position where I could influence Pinnacle's future. 18 months of 60-hour weeks, strategic presentations, and building relationships with key decision-makers at Titanium Global. I volunteered for every high-visibility project, solved problems other analysts couldn't crack, and established myself as someone who could deliver results under pressure. When the opportunity finally came, it wasn't what I'd expected. Pinnacle Marketing Solutions was underperforming compared to their projections, and Titanium Global was considering either a complete management overhaul or selling the subsidiary entirely. David Morrison asked me to lead a comprehensive analysis of their operations and provide recommendations for their future. "This is a big assignment, Sarah," he told me during our briefing meeting. "Pinnacle has been coasting for too long. They need fresh leadership, new strategies, a complete cultural transformation. If we can't turn them around in the next year, we'll have to cut our losses." "What kind of timeline are we looking at for implementing changes?" I asked, keeping my voice professionally neutral. "Aggressive. We want a preliminary analysis in 6 weeks, full recommendations in 3 months, and if we proceed with restructuring, we'll want new leadership in place within 6 months." 6 months. 6 months to position myself as the obvious choice to take over Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. 6 months to become Marcus Chen's boss. I'll need full access to their personnel files, performance data, client relationships, and financial records. I said, "You'll have whatever you need. This is top priority." That night, I sat in my apartment, a much nicer apartment than the one I'd lived in when Marcus was breaking my heart, and allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. Everything was falling into place exactly as I'd planned. All those months of studying, working, climbing, positioning myself strategically were about to pay off. But more than that, I was finally going to get what I'd been working toward for 2 years. I was going to look Marcus Chen in the eye as his superior and watch him realize that the woman he'd dismissed as too ugly to love was now in control of his career. The analysis phase was the most challenging part of my plan, but also the most satisfying. I spent weeks at Pinnacle's offices, reviewing their operations with the clinical precision of a surgeon. I interviewed their staff, analyzed their client relationships, evaluated their campaign effectiveness, and studied their financial performance. And I watched Marcus. He had no idea who I was, of course. To him, I was just another corporate analyst from the parent company, someone to be politely cooperative with while hoping she'd deliver a favorable review. He was professional during our interactions, answering my questions thoroughly and providing requested documents promptly. But I could see the dismissiveness in his eyes, the same casual disregard he'd always had for people he considered beneath his notice. When I asked about campaign strategy, he spoke slowly, as if explaining complex concepts to someone who might not understand. When I requested client data, he made sure to explain the context in detail, assuming I wouldn't be able to interpret the information correctly. He was still the same arrogant, condescending man who had laughed about my appearance 2 years ago. Still someone who judged people's worth based on superficial criteria. Still someone who believed his own superiority was self-evident. Still someone who had absolutely no idea what was about to happen to him. During my analysis, I discovered several things that made my plan even more satisfying. First, Marcus's performance, while adequate, was actually holding back several major client relationships. His strategic thinking was outdated, his creative input was minimal, and his leadership skills were non-existent. Second, Pinnacle's underperformance wasn't due to market conditions or competitive pressure. It was due to complacent management and lack of vision. Third, and most importantly, the company was perfectly positioned for someone with fresh ideas and modern strategic thinking to turn it around completely. Someone exactly like me. My preliminary report was delivered right on schedule, and it painted a clear picture. Pinnacle Marketing Solutions had tremendous potential, but was being held back by outdated leadership and insufficient innovation. The recommended solution was immediate management restructuring, strategic realignment, and the installation of new leadership with a proven track record of driving growth. "This is excellent work, Sarah," David Morrison told me after reviewing my findings. "Your analysis is thorough, your recommendations are sound, and your strategic vision is exactly what Pinnacle needs." "Thank you. I believe they could be one of our top-performing subsidiaries with the right leadership in place." "About that leadership?" He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "We've been discussing your career trajectory lately. Your performance over the past 2 years has been exceptional, and this Pinnacle analysis demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need in our subsidiary management roles." My heart started racing, but I kept my expression calm and professional. "I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had here. How would you feel about putting your money where your mouth is? Leading the turnaround yourself? This was it. The moment I'd been working toward for 2 years. The moment when all my planning, all my sacrifice, all my careful positioning would finally pay off. I'd welcome the challenge, I said simply. The position would be Managing Director of Strategic Operations, reporting directly to me but with full authority over Pinnacle's day-to-day operations. You'd be responsible for implementing all the changes you've recommended, rebuilding their client relationships, and turning them into a profitable growth engine. And the current management team? That would be your decision. You'd have the authority to make whatever personnel changes you deemed necessary. Personnel changes, including the authority to fire Marcus Chen, or keep him on as a subordinate, or restructure his role in whatever way I saw fit. When would you need a decision? I need to know by Friday. If you accept, we'll announce the appointment next week and you'll take over operations the following Monday. I pretended to consider the offer, asking thoughtful questions about budget authority, reporting structure, and performance expectations. But inside, I was already celebrating. After 2 years of careful planning, I was about to become Marcus Chen's boss. More than that, I was about to become the kind of woman who commanded respect, who couldn't be dismissed, who could never again be called too ugly to love. Friday came and I accepted the position. The announcement went out Monday morning to Titanium Global's entire network. Sarah Mitchell had been appointed Managing Director of Strategic Operations for Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, effective immediately. I spent the weekend preparing for my first day, reviewing personnel files one final time, planning my initial meetings, and deciding exactly how I wanted to handle my reunion with Marcus. I could have fired him immediately, of course. Could have walked in on Monday morning and cleaned house, eliminating everyone who didn't meet my standards. But that would have been too quick, too easy. That would have denied me the satisfaction of watching him slowly realize who I was and what I now represented in his life. Instead, I planned something much more elegant. Monday morning, I walked into Pinnacle Marketing Solutions wearing a charcoal gray suit that projected authority and confidence. My hair was professionally styled, my makeup was flawless, and my bearing was that of someone who belonged in charge. I looked like a woman who had worked hard to get where she was, who had earned her position through merit and determination. I looked like the kind of woman who could never be called too ugly to love. The first all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main conference room. I arrived early to set up my materials and review my notes one final time. As employees filed in, I watched Marcus enter with several other senior staff members, laughing at someone's joke, completely at ease in what he assumed was his secure professional environment. He glanced at me briefly as he took his seat, probably wondering who the new corporate representative was and whether she would be making his life more difficult. There was no recognition in his eyes, no moment of realization. To him, I was still just another face in a suit, someone to be professionally polite to while hoping for a favorable outcome. I stood at the front of the room and waited for everyone to settle. 23 employees, including Marcus, all looking at me expectantly, all waiting to learn about their future under new leadership. Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Sarah Mitchell, and as of today, I'm your new Managing Director of Strategic Operations. I saw Marcus's eyebrows raise slightly. The name might have sounded familiar, but he still wasn't placing me. Still wasn't remembering the woman whose heart he'd broken while laughing about how ugly she was. I've spent the past several months analyzing Pinnacle's operations, and I'm excited about the potential I see here. This company has tremendous talent and strong client relationships, but we need to modernize our approach and elevate our strategic thinking. I clicked to my first slide, outlining the changes I plan to implement. New client acquisition strategies, updated creative processes, performance metrics, team restructuring. Marcus was taking notes, nodding along like a diligent employee receiving instructions from his new boss. I'll be meeting with each of you individually over the next 2 weeks to discuss your roles, your goals, and how we can work together to transform Pinnacle into a market leader. I'll be scheduling those meetings through my assistant, and I expect everyone to come prepared to discuss not just your current responsibilities, but your vision for how this company can grow. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room before landing directly on Marcus. For just a moment, I held his eyes, watching for any flicker of recognition. Still nothing. I believe in leading by example, in earning respect through results, and in building a culture where everyone can contribute their best work. I also believe in accountability, in professional excellence, and in treating every client relationship as an opportunity to demonstrate our value. More note-taking, more nodding. Marcus was the picture of an engaged employee, ready to impress his new supervisor. Before we dive into specifics, I want to share a little about my background. I started my career at a small tech startup, where I learned the importance of innovation and adaptability. I then moved into consulting, where I developed expertise in strategic analysis and organizational development. Most recently, I've been working at Titanium Global's corporate level, where I've had the opportunity to study best practices across multiple subsidiaries. I clicked to the next slide, which showed my educational background and professional achievements: MBA with honors, successful consulting projects, strategic analysis expertise, leadership development. I believe experiences, both personal and professional, shape our approach to business. They teach us about resilience, about the importance of never underestimating people, and about the danger of making assumptions based on superficial impressions. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Not recognition, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of unease. Something about my tone, maybe, or the way I was looking at the room. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. We're going to accomplish great things together, and I have no doubt that everyone in this room has the potential to exceed their current performance levels. I ended the meeting with logistics about individual appointments and immediate priorities. As people filed out, Marcus lingered, approaching my table with the kind of careful confidence he used when he wanted to make a good impression. Ms. Mitchell, welcome to Pinnacle. I'm Marcus Chen, Senior Account Manager for our Western Regional clients. He extended his hand with a practiced smile, and I took it, feeling the same hand that had touched me when I thought we were in love, that had stroked my hair while he was secretly planning to dump me for being too ugly. Mr. Chen, I said, keeping my voice professionally neutral. I'm looking forward to our individual meeting. I believe you're scheduled for Thursday afternoon? Yes, that's right. I wanted to say that your vision for the company sounds exciting. I've been here for 3 years, and I'm always eager to contribute to new strategic initiatives. 3 years. He'd been working here the entire time I'd known him, the entire time he'd been stringing me along while calling me convenient and entertaining, while laughing about how grateful I was for his attention. Excellent. I'll see you Thursday. He nodded and headed toward the door, then paused and turned back. I'm sorry, but has someone told me your name before? Sarah Mitchell? It sounds familiar. This was it. The moment I'd been planning for 2 years. The moment when I could reveal exactly who I was and watch him realize what a catastrophic mistake he'd made in underestimating me. But I wasn't ready yet. I wanted to savor this, to build the suspense, to let him wonder why my name sounded familiar while he tried to impress his new boss, who happened to be the woman he'd dismissed as too ugly to love. I don't believe we've met before, I said with a slight smile. Perhaps you've heard of some of my work in the industry. Perhaps. Well, I look forward to our meeting. So do I, Mr. Chen. So do I. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I spent the 3 days between our first meeting and his scheduled appointment conducting other employee interviews, but my mind was constantly circling back to the conversation I was about to have with Marcus. I'd planned every word, every pause, every subtle hint that would slowly lead him toward the truth. This wasn't going to be a sudden revelation. This was going to be a masterclass in psychological warfare. I scheduled his appointment for 4 p.m., the last slot of the day. I wanted privacy for what was about to unfold. No interruptions, no witnesses. Just Marcus and me, finally having the honest conversation we should have had 2 years ago. I spent extra time on my appearance that morning, choosing a burgundy blazer that projected authority and confidence. My hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, my makeup was flawless but understated, and my jewelry was minimal but expensive. I looked like a woman who had fought for her position and won. I looked like someone who could never be dismissed or underestimated again. Marcus arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing his most professional expression. He knocked on my office door at exactly 4 o'clock, and I called for him to enter while finishing up an email. I wanted him to wait, wanted him to stand there for a moment while I demonstrated my control over the situation. Please have a seat, I said without looking up from my computer. I'll be with you in just a moment. I could feel him settling into the chair across from my desk, could sense his nervous energy as he waited for my attention. When I finally looked up, he was sitting with perfect posture, hands folded in his lap, ready to impress his new boss with his professionalism and competence. Mr. Chen, thank you for coming in. I opened his personnel file, spreading the documents across my desk with deliberate precision. I've been reviewing your work here at Pinnacle, and I wanted to discuss your role going forward. Of course. I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to your strategic vision. Let's start with your current client portfolio. I pulled out a summary of his accounts, studying it as if I hadn't already memorized every detail. You've been handling the Western Regional accounts for 3 years now? That's correct. I started here right after college, and I've been building those relationships consistently since then. Right after college. Right around the time he'd met me at that marketing conference, when he was looking for an ego boost after his bad breakup with Jessica, when I was just a convenient distraction, someone grateful enough for his attention to serve his purposes without requiring real emotional investment. And how would you characterize your relationship with these clients? I asked, making notes on a legal pad. What value do you feel you bring to their campaigns? Marcus launched into a prepared speech about relationship management, strategic thinking, and creative problem-solving. He was confident, articulate, and completely oblivious to the fact that he was essentially conducting a job interview with the woman whose heart he'd broken while laughing about her appearance. I let him talk, occasionally asking follow-up questions, taking notes, playing the role of an evaluating supervisor. But underneath my professional demeanor, I was studying him with the intensity of a scientist examining a fascinating specimen. He was exactly the same confident smile, same casual arrogance, same assumption that his charm would carry him through any situation. Your performance reviews have been consistently positive, I said, flipping through his file. Your supervisors describe you as reliable, professional, effective with clients. I take pride in my work. I'm sure you do. I set down his file and leaned back in my chair, really looking at him for the first time since he'd entered my office. Tell me, Mr. Chen, what do you think about when you look at someone? The question caught him off guard. His confident expression flickered for just a moment before he recovered. I'm not sure I understand. When you meet someone new, when you're evaluating their potential, their worth, their value to you, what criteria do you use? Well, he shifted in his chair, clearly trying to figure out where this line of questioning was heading. I suppose I look at their professional qualifications, their experience, their ability to contribute to our goals. Just professional criteria? Primarily, yes. You don't make judgments based on appearance? On whether someone fits your idea of what a successful person should look like? Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. Something in my tone was putting him on alert, though he still couldn't identify what. I try to focus on substance over style. How admirable. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder, setting it on the desk between us. Do you mind if I record the rest of our conversation? For my notes. Of course, that's fine. I pressed record and stated the date, time, and participants for the file. Then I settled back in my chair and smiled at him, not the professional smile I'd been wearing, but something sharper, more personal. Let's talk about your future here at Pinnacle, I said, under my leadership. I'm excited about the possibilities. Are you? I tilted my head slightly, studying his face. Even though you have no idea who I am or what I'm capable of? I've researched your background. Your credentials are impressive. Have you? I leaned forward slightly. What exactly did you discover in your research? Marcus straightened his shoulders, clearly pleased to demonstrate his preparedness. You have an MBA from Northwestern. You worked for several years in consulting with a focus on strategic analysis, and you were recruited to Titanium Global based on your exceptional analytical skills and innovative thinking. All true. What else? You've been involved in several high-profile turnaround projects, and your recommendations consistently result in improved performance for underperforming divisions. Also true. I paused, letting the silence stretch between us. But what about before that? What about my earlier career experiences? You mentioned working at a startup, but I didn't find specific details about that position. No, you wouldn't have. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. It was a small tech company. Very small. The kind of place where someone like you might not think twice about the people who work there. I could feel his confusion growing behind me. He was trying to piece together what this conversation was really about, why his new boss seemed to be taking such a personal interest in his character and judgment. Mr. Chen, do you remember attending a marketing conference in Chicago about 3 years ago? The silence that followed was telling. I turned around to face him, and I could see the wheels beginning to turn in his mind. His face had gone slightly pale, and his confident posture was starting to crack. "I attend a lot of conferences," he said carefully. This one was in March, the Midwest Marketing Innovation Summit. "You were there representing Pinnacle, networking, looking for new opportunities." Yes, I think I remember that conference. "Do you remember meeting anyone there? Anyone who made an impression on you?" Marcus's hands had started to fidget with his portfolio. The professional mask was slipping, and underneath it I could see the first hints of real anxiety. "I met a lot of people." "I'm sure you did." I walked back to my desk but didn't sit down. Instead, I stood behind my chair, my hands resting on the back of it, looking down at him with the authority of someone who held his future in her hands. "But I'm thinking of someone specific, someone who worked at that small startup I mentioned." His breathing had changed. Shallow, quick breaths that told me he was starting to understand, but couldn't quite believe it. "Someone who was impressed by your confidence, your charm, your apparent success." I paused, watching his face carefully. "Someone young and naive enough to believe that a man like you might actually be interested in her for the right reasons." "Sarah," the word came out as barely a whisper. "Hello, Marcus." The color drained completely from his face. He stared at me like he was seeing a ghost, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with disbelief. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the recorder, capturing every second of his shock. "You're..." He swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. "You're Sarah?" "Sarah Mitchell, yes." I sat down in my chair, folding my hands on the desk in front of me. "Though I suppose you knew me as Sarah Williams back then. I've been using my middle name professionally. But you look..." He gestured vaguely at me, still struggling to process what was happening. "Different?" I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "Yes, I imagine I do. It's amazing what 2 years of hard work, professional development, and genuine self-confidence can accomplish." Marcus was staring at me like he was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. The woman sitting across from him, polished, successful, undeniably in control, bore little resemblance to the insecure, desperate for approval person he'd been dating 3 years ago. "How long have you known?" he asked finally. "About me working here, I mean. I've known exactly where you worked since the day after you called me too ugly to love." The words hit him like a physical blow. His face went from pale to gray, and I watched him realize that I'd heard everything that night. Every cruel word, every dismissive laugh, every casual humiliation he'd inflicted on someone who had trusted him with her heart. "Sarah, I can explain..." "Can you?" I leaned back in my chair, my voice perfectly calm. "Can you explain why you thought it was acceptable to string someone along for 8 months while secretly mocking her appearance to other women? Can you explain why you found my feelings so entertaining that you and your friend were literally laughing about them?" "It wasn't..." He stopped, seeming to realize that there was no good way to finish that sentence. "It wasn't what, Marcus? It wasn't cruel? It wasn't heartless? It wasn't the kind of behavior that might motivate someone to spend 2 years transforming herself into the kind of person who could make your life very, very difficult." The reality of his situation was starting to sink in. The woman he'd dismissed as too ugly to love was now his boss. The person whose feelings he'd treated as a joke now had complete authority over his career, his reputation, his professional future. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "What do I want?" I stood up again, walking around the desk to perch on the edge of it, looking down at him. "I want to understand something, Marcus. I want to understand how someone becomes the kind of person who can look at another human being and decide they're too ugly to deserve genuine love." "Sarah, please..." "No, I'm genuinely curious. Because I've spent 2 years thinking about this and I still can't figure it out." "Was it something you learned growing up? Were you taught that a person's value is determined by their appearance? Or is it something deeper? Some fundamental lack of empathy that makes it easy for you to hurt people for your own amusement?" Marcus was fidgeting with his hands, avoiding eye contact, looking like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "I was going through a difficult time," he said weakly. "I'd just come out of a bad relationship and I wasn't thinking clearly." "You were going through a difficult time." I repeated his words slowly, savoring each syllable. "So you decided to make someone else go through a difficult time too? How thoughtful of you." "It wasn't intentional, wasn't it?" I slid off the desk and walked back to the window, speaking to the glass. "You made a conscious choice to pursue me at that conference. You made a conscious choice to ask for my number, to suggest dinner, to start a relationship you never intended to take seriously. You made a conscious choice to keep me around for 8 months while planning to discard me. Every kiss, every intimate moment, every time you told me I was beautiful, those were all conscious choices. I turned back to face him. And the night I heard you laughing about how ugly I was, that was a conscious choice too. You chose to mock me. You chose to share intimate details of our relationship with another woman. You chose to turn my feelings into entertainment. Sarah, I'm sorry. His voice was barely audible. I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I regret. Do you? I interrupted. Do you really regret it, Marcus? Or do you just regret that there are consequences now? He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop him. Don't answer that. I honestly don't care about your regrets. What I care about is this. You looked at me 3 years ago and decided I was someone you could use and discard without consequence. You decided I was too ugly, too desperate, too pathetic to deserve respect. You were wrong about all of those things, but most importantly, you were wrong about the consequences. I walked back to my chair and sat down, pulling his personnel file toward me. So here's what's going to happen now. You're going to continue working here, under my supervision, and you're going to be absolutely excellent at your job. You're going to exceed every performance metric, you're going to maintain every client relationship, and you're going to conduct yourself with complete professionalism at all times. Marcus nodded frantically. Yes, of course, absolutely. And in return, I'm going to treat you with exactly the respect you deserve. No more, no less. I'm going to evaluate your work fairly, provide you with honest feedback, and give you opportunities to prove your value to this company. Thank you, he said, relief evident in his voice. Don't thank me yet. I opened his file and pulled out a blank performance evaluation form. Because here's the thing about respect, Marcus, it has to be earned. And you're starting from a significant deficit. I clicked my pen and began writing on the form. Let's start with your current client portfolio. The Henderson account. They've been expressing dissatisfaction with their recent campaigns. The Morrison Group is considering switching to a competitor. And the Blackstone project came in 15% over budget due to poor planning. Those issues aren't... He started to protest, but I silenced him with a look. Aren't what? Your responsibility? You're the senior account manager for all 3 clients. Their problems are your problems. I continued writing, documenting every performance issue I'd discovered during my analysis. Issues that his previous supervisors had overlooked or minimized, but that I was going to address with laser focus. Here's your improvement plan, I said, sliding the document across the desk. 30 days to resolve the Henderson situation, 60 days to solidify the Morrison Group relationship, and you'll be personally covering the budget overrun on the Blackstone project. Marcus stared at the paper like it was a death sentence. This is impossible to achieve in these time frames. Is it? I tilted my head, studying him. Or is it just more challenging than what you're used to? Because from where I'm sitting, these look like the kinds of problems that someone with your experience and talents should be able to handle easily. Unless, I paused dramatically, unless your previous performance evaluations were inflated? Unless you've been coasting on charm and minimal effort? Unless you're actually not as competent as your file suggests. That's not fair. Fair? The word came out sharper than I'd intended. You want to talk about fair, Marcus? I stood up slowly, placing my hands flat on the desk and leaning toward him. Was it fair when you led me to believe you cared about me while secretly planning to dump me? Was it fair when you mocked my appearance to another woman? Was it fair when you called me too ugly to love? Marcus shrank back in his chair, and for the first time in this conversation, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not just anxiety about his job, but real, visceral fear of the woman sitting across from him. You're right, he whispered. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. No, it wasn't. I sat back down, my voice returning to its professional tone. But that's the past. What matters now is the future. Your future, which is currently in my hands. I pulled out another document from his file. I've been reviewing your compensation package as well. It seems quite generous for someone with your performance record. My salary is within industry standards. For someone who consistently exceeds expectations, yes. But as we've established, your actual performance has some significant gaps. I made a note on the compensation worksheet. I'll be recommending a salary adjustment to reflect your true contribution to the company. You can't... He stopped himself, realizing that I absolutely could. I can do whatever I deem necessary for the good of this company, I said calmly. That's what being in charge means, Marcus. That's what having authority looks like. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. Of course, if you feel that my expectations are unrealistic or my evaluation is unfair, you're always free to seek employment elsewhere. I'm sure there are plenty of companies that would be interested in someone with your qualifications." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. If he quit, he'd have to explain to future employers why he'd left a senior position so abruptly. If he stayed, he'd have to work harder than he'd ever worked in his life, under the supervision of someone who knew exactly what kind of person he really was. "I want to make this work," he said finally. "I want to prove that I can meet your expectations. Do you?" I studied his face, looking for any sign of the arrogance that had defined him 3 years ago. "Because this isn't going to be easy, Marcus. I'm going to hold you to a higher standard than you've ever experienced. I'm going to expect excellence, not adequacy." "I understand. I'm also going to be watching you very carefully. How you treat clients, how you interact with colleagues, how you conduct yourself when you think no one important is paying attention. Because character matters, and yours has some significant flaws that need addressing." Marcus nodded, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. The man who had once dismissed me as too ugly to love was now hanging on my every word, desperate to please his new boss. "There's one more thing," I said, reaching into my desk drawer. "I want you to have this." I pulled out a small framed photo and placed it on the desk where he could see it. It was a picture of me from 3 years ago, the old me with unstyled hair and uncertain posture, wearing the kind of outfit that screamed insecurity. It was the me he had known, the me he had judged too ugly to love. "I want you to keep this on your desk," I said, as a reminder. A reminder of what? That the woman in this picture was worth more than you ever recognized, that she deserved better than what you gave her, and that you should never, ever underestimate someone based on your shallow first impressions. Marcus stared at the photo, then at me, then back at the photo. I could see him trying to reconcile the two images, the insecure woman he'd known and the confident executive sitting across from him now. "Every day, when you look at that picture, I want you to remember that you had something precious and you threw it away because you couldn't see past the surface. I want you to remember that your failure to recognize value doesn't diminish that value. And I want you to remember that the choices you make about how you treat people have consequences you might not see coming." I stood up, indicating that our meeting was over. "Your first performance review under my leadership will be in 30 days. I suggest you use that time wisely." Marcus gathered his portfolio and stood up on unsteady legs. He looked like a man who'd just survived a car accident, shaken, disoriented, fundamentally changed by the experience. "Sarah?" he said as he reached the door. "Ms. Mitchell," I corrected. "Ms. Mitchell. I just want you to know, I meant what I said. I really am sorry." I looked at him for a long moment, this man who had once held my heart in his hands and crushed it for his own amusement. "I know you are, Marcus. You're sorry because there are consequences now. You're sorry because the person you hurt has power over you. But you're not sorry for who you are, and that's the real problem." He left without another word, closing the door softly behind him. I sat alone in my office, listening to the sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction settle into my bones. The first phase of my revenge was complete. Marcus Chen now knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of. He understood that his career, his reputation, and his future were in the hands of the woman he'd once called too ugly to love. But this was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, I watched Marcus transform before my eyes. The confident, casual arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by nervous energy and desperate professionalism. He arrived at work early, stayed late, and approached every task with the kind of intensity I'd never seen from him before. The Henderson account, which had seemed like an impossible challenge, was resolved within 3 weeks. Marcus worked overtime to redesign their campaign strategy, personally met with their leadership team multiple times, and delivered results that exceeded even my aggressive expectations. The Morrison Group, rather than switching to a competitor, signed an expanded contract after Marcus presented them with innovative solutions to problems they hadn't even realized they had. He was working harder than he'd ever worked in his life, and it showed. He'd lost weight from stress, developed dark circles under his eyes from sleepless nights, and maintained a constant state of hypervigilance whenever I was around. Every interaction we had was painfully formal. Every email he sent was meticulously crafted. Every report he submitted was thorough to the point of obsession. I could have taken pity on him. could have eased the pressure, acknowledged his improvements, let him know that his job was secure as long as he maintained this level of performance. But I didn't. Because this wasn't about his job performance. This was about justice. This was about a man learning to understand the weight of his choices, the impact of his cruelty, the cost of treating another person's heart like a disposable toy. During our second monthly review, I decided to push him a little further. "Your recent work has been adequate," I told him, reviewing his performance metrics. "The client retention improvements are notable, and your campaign innovations show genuine strategic thinking." "Thank you," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "However," I continued and watched his face fall, "I have some concerns about your leadership potential." "Leadership potential? You're a senior account manager, Marcus. That title implies a certain level of authority, a certain ability to guide and inspire others. But I haven't seen evidence of those qualities." I pulled out feedback forms I'd collected from his junior colleagues. "Your team members describe you as distant, professional but not collaborative, someone who focuses on his own projects without contributing to the broader team culture." This wasn't entirely fair. Marcus had always been a decent colleague, neither particularly inspiring nor particularly problematic. But fairness wasn't the point anymore. The point was ensuring that he understood how it felt to have his worth questioned, his efforts minimized, his value to the organization called into doubt. "I'd like to recommend you for a leadership development program," I said, sliding a brochure across the desk. "It's a 6-month intensive course that covers team management, emotional intelligence, and collaborative leadership strategies." Marcus looked at the brochure like it was a trap. "Is this optional?" "Nothing is optional when you're working to rebuild your reputation," I replied. "This program will help you develop the skills you need to truly excel in your role." The program I was recommending was legitimate and valuable, but it was also expensive, time-consuming, and would require him to attend weekend sessions for 6 months. It would monopolize his free time, drain his energy, and constantly remind him that his current skills were considered insufficient. "The company will cover the tuition costs," I added, "but you'll need to complete the program on your own time. Evenings and weekends." "Of course," he said quickly, "whatever you think is best. I also want you to start mentoring some of our junior staff members. Sarah Kim and David Chen in particular could benefit from your experience." The irony of assigning him to mentor someone named Sarah wasn't lost on either of us. I watched him register the name, watched him realize that he would be spending time nurturing the professional development of a young woman who bore the same name as the person he'd once dismissed as too ugly to love. "You'll meet with them weekly, help them develop their client relationship skills, and provide regular feedback on their progress. I'll expect detailed reports on their development every month." "Understood." "And Marcus?" I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. "I want you to remember something as you work with these junior staff members. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance, their confidence level, or how much you think they can do for your career. Everyone has the potential to surprise you, to grow beyond your initial impressions, to become more than you ever imagined they could be." His face flushed red, and I knew the message had landed exactly as intended. "Is there anything else you need from me?" he asked quietly. "Actually, yes." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out an invitation. "There's a company networking event next month. Cocktails with clients, partners, and senior management from across the Titanium Global family. I'll need you to attend as my representative for the Western Regional accounts." Marcus took the invitation, and I watched his hands shake slightly as he read the details. A networking event where he would be introduced as my subordinate, where he would have to explain his role under my leadership, where everyone would see the dynamic between the successful female executive and her nervous male employee. "This is important, Marcus. First impressions matter in this industry, and I need you to represent our company with confidence and professionalism." I paused, letting the words sink in. "I need you to be someone people will remember for all the right reasons." 3 years ago, Marcus had worried about being seen in public with me because I wasn't arm candy material. Now he would be attending a prestigious industry event as my representative, and his professional reputation would depend on his ability to reflect well on my leadership. "I won't let you down," he said. "See that you don't." As he left my office, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. The transformation was remarkable. The arrogant man who had once laughed about my appearance was now desperate to earn my approval. The person who had worried about his image being damaged by associating with me was now depending on my recommendation for his career advancement. But the most satisfying part wasn't his fear or his desperation. It was the gradual change I was seeing in how he treated other people. The leadership program was actually helping him develop genuine empathy. His mentoring sessions with Sarah Kim and David Chen were forcing him to consider how his words and actions affected others. The constant pressure to perform at his highest level was teaching him to value substance over style. Marcus Chen was becoming a better person, and he hated every minute of it. The networking event arrived faster than I'd expected, and I spent considerable time preparing for what would essentially be my public debut as Marcus's superior. I chose a black cocktail dress that was both professional and elegant, something that would command respect while making it clear that I belonged in rooms full of powerful people. Marcus met me at the venue, wearing his best suit and an expression of barely controlled anxiety. He looked like a man attending his own execution, which, in a way, he was. This event would cement our professional relationship in front of dozens of industry leaders, making it impossible for him to ever again pretend that he was anything other than my subordinate. "Ms. Mitchell," he said as I approached, his voice carefully formal. "You look—" He stopped himself, clearly realizing that commenting on my appearance might not be appropriate given our history. "Professional," I finished for him. "I look professional, as do you. Are you ready for this?" "Yes, ma'am." The event was exactly what I'd expected. A room full of successful people networking, making deals, and sizing each other up. I moved through the crowd with confidence, introducing myself to key players, discussing strategic initiatives, establishing my presence as someone who belonged at this level. Marcus followed slightly behind me, playing his role perfectly. He was attentive without being obsequious, knowledgeable without trying to overshadow me, respectful without appearing intimidated. To any outside observer, we looked like a successful executive and her competent senior manager, exactly the image I wanted to project. "Sarah Mitchell," I said, extending my hand to Rebecca Chen, VP of Client Relations for one of Titanium Global's largest subsidiaries, Managing Director of Strategic Operations for Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. "Rebecca Chen, lovely to meet you. I've heard excellent things about the turnaround you're leading at Pinnacle." "Thank you. I'd like you to meet Marcus Chen, my Senior Account Manager for Western Regional Accounts. He's been instrumental in our recent client retention improvements." Marcus stepped forward smoothly, shaking Rebecca's hand with just the right amount of confidence. "Ms. Chen, it's a pleasure. Sarah, Ms. Mitchell has been an exceptional leader. Her strategic vision has transformed how we approach client relationships." I felt a surge of satisfaction at hearing him praise my leadership in front of a room full of industry professionals. The man who had once considered me too ugly to take seriously was now publicly acknowledging my superior capabilities. "That's wonderful to hear," Rebecca said. "Strategic leadership can be challenging to find in this industry. Ms. Mitchell has a gift for seeing potential where others see problems." Marcus continued, and I knew he was thinking about more than just business situations. "She's taught me to look beyond surface impressions and focus on substantive value." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Marcus expertly supporting my talking points while making it clear that I was the decision-maker and he was the implementer. It was a perfect demonstration of professional hierarchy, and I could see the approval in Rebecca's eyes as she observed our dynamic. As the evening progressed, I introduced Marcus to dozens of people, always making sure to establish our respective roles in the introduction. He was my senior account manager, my Western Regional Specialist, one of my key reports. Each introduction reinforced the power structure between us. Each handshake was another moment where he had to acknowledge my authority in front of his peers. "You're handling this well," I told him during a brief break between conversations. "Thank you. I want to represent you, represent the company, professionally. You are—" I paused, studying his face. "You know, 3 years ago, you worried about how it would look to be seen with me in public. How does it feel now, being introduced as my employee?" Marcus's composure cracked for just a moment, and I saw a flash of the shame he'd been carrying. "It feels like exactly what I deserve," he said quietly. "Good. Because it is." The evening concluded with a brief presentation from David Morrison about Titanium Global's strategic direction for the coming year. As we listened to his remarks about innovation, leadership, and the importance of recognizing talent regardless of its packaging, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. When the event ended, Marcus walked me to my car, maintaining his professional demeanor even though we were alone. "Thank you for including me tonight," he said as I unlocked my door. "I know I still have a lot to prove, but I hope I represented you well." "You did." I got into my car, then rolled down the window. "Marcus? Yes? That woman you were dating 3 years ago, the one you thought was too ugly to love, she's gone." I buried her, and everything she represented about settling for less than I deserved. The person who replaced her is someone you could never dismiss, never underestimate, never treat as disposable. Remember that. He nodded, his face pale in the parking lot lights. "I will." As I drove home that night, I felt a deep sense of completion beginning to settle over me. The revenge wasn't finished. There were still lessons for Marcus to learn, still consequences for him to face. But the core transformation was complete. I had become the kind of person who commanded respect, who couldn't be dismissed, who held real power in the professional world. More importantly, I had forced Marcus to confront the kind of person he really was, and to live with the consequences of his choices. Every day he worked under my supervision was a reminder that actions have consequences, that cruelty leaves marks, that the people you hurt might someday be in a position to hurt you back. But the most satisfying part wasn't his discomfort or his fear. It was watching him slowly become a better person despite himself. The leadership training, the mentoring responsibilities, the constant pressure to perform at his highest level, all of it was forcing him to develop the empathy and character he'd lacked 3 years ago. Marcus Chen was learning to see people as human beings rather than objects for his use or amusement. He was learning to value substance over surface, to treat everyone with basic respect, to consider the impact of his words and actions on others. He was learning, in other words, to become the kind of person who would never again tell someone they were too ugly to love. And that, more than any professional triumph or personal satisfaction, felt like true victory. The final phase of my plan would unfold over the next few months, as Marcus continued to work under my supervision, and I continued to reshape both his career and his character. But the foundation was already in place. The woman he had dismissed as worthless was now the most important person in his professional life. The person whose feelings he had mocked was now someone whose approval he desperately sought. The ugly girl he had laughed about was now his boss, and she was beautiful in ways he was only beginning to understand. Revenge, as it turned out, was indeed a dish best served cold. But sometimes it came with a side of redemption, and that made it taste even sweeter.